same diet, same training, everything, I don't think you're going to see a massive difference in the end results between the two. I think the differences are more going to be in the journey rather than the end result. In that, depending on the individual, they may find the journey more difficult just on test.
Yeah.
And they might find the test and EQ a little bit easier to work with.
I could see that.
I think the overall result is going to be very, very similar.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast with Dave Crosland. You can tell he's really excited for the show. All of our programming is brought to you by evalbloodanalysis.com. You can get your lab work done by Dave. If you live in the UK, you can go to Strom Sports Nutrition to get all your supplements if you're in the UK. They've got great health stacks, performance supplements. If you're on cycle, check out Strom Sports Nutrition. I believe it's stromsports.com. TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there for high-quality, third-party tested supplements, including some awesome prices on highly branched cyclic dextrin and every protein powder you can possibly think of. Use our code THINK over there. And, of course, supplementsource.ca for Canadians. Dave, how's it going, man? We were away for a week, but people didn't realize that because I didn't put a show out 2 weeks ago. I put out last week's show last week, and now we're back. So happy New Year to you.
Yeah, it will be. New Year's Eve, isn't it? So it'll be New Year tonight, yeah.
They will see this, though, after it's already happened.
So happy New Year, everybody.
Oh, my God. 2025 is so awesome, Dave. I'm loving it. Aren't you?
Yeah, the first week's been amazing.
Yeah, I can tell there's a lot of really great things going to happen. Everything's different. 2025. What's going on, man? Do you have a good Christmas?
It's quiet. Very quiet, which was nice, but bored now.
All right. Well, listen, we've got a bunch of stuff. Everybody left us questions. And by the way, guys, if you want to take part in the next episode, then comment below. That's how we generate topics for the next episode. Plus, all your comments, likes, and shares, all that stuff. It helps to boost our programming up in the algorithm. You guys are freaking awesome at that. I love all your positivity, all your comments. And if you're new here, let me encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell, Dave, because we have several bodybuilding podcasts that come out each week. So this one generated a bunch of responses. People wanted to throw in their own 2 cents. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I ask our Uncle Dave, what does he think? So one of our listeners, he says, hi, what would you recommend? 1,000 milligrams of test with an AI or 600 milligrams of test with 400 milligrams of EQ? Which would build more muscle over 20 weeks?
I suspect the test only.
What is that?
I think it's got a slightly better anabolic profile than EQ has.
Bring your mic over a little bit.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah, just bring the mic closer to you, Dave.
Well, look, there's a problem, okay? There's a structural, physical problem here.
Oh, your mic's on the desk.
My mic's on the desk, and I have a belly.
Okay.
So I can only get so close to the desk.
So what you're telling me is you
fat,
needed that
yes.
you needed that boom arm to get to you that you used to have.
Is that better, children?
Oh, so much better, Dave.
Are we all sitting comfortably and ready for today's story?
Actually, I think you're talking into the back of the mic.
Look, last time you told me to turn it round so it was to the back.
Okay, now that sounds good. That sounds good.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's way better. Thank you.
You're happy now?
I'm mildly happy. Mildly, okay? Put it this way, I'm not displeased.
Well, if you were a decent podcaster, you'd send me a mic boom, but you don't. So I just have to struggle with my little cheap, shitty eBay mic stand.
All right. Well, listen. So, 1,000 milligrams of test versus 600 test, 400 EQ. I mean, here's what I noticed. I'm going to tell you a little story. And I've told this story before, but I'm assuming this guy hadn't heard it. And this story has a point. I ran, whatever for my first 3 cycles, and then I ran test in DECA. I still came off, recovered my natural test between cycles, and when I tried to do that after test in DECA, 500 test, 400 DECA, I had a really difficult time recovering. So the next time I said, you know what, screw that, I'm just going to do 1,000 tests. Pretty similar. Everybody nowadays is all about the total milligrams. What's your total milligrams? And that's what really matters. not all compounds are the same. So I run 1,000 tests, which is nothing like 500 tests, 400 deca, and I got the absolute worst back knee that you could possibly imagine. It was terrible. And I was controlling estrogen and everything, but there was just such a heavy androgenic load from the test versus test and deca, more of an anabolic compound. It's going to help you grow more muscle, but not be as, cause as many androgenic sides. I found that test and deca for growth and to reduce side effects outside of the fact that I had a harder time recovering, I had a much better growth experience with, less, I guess, long-term sides. I don't know. It could be argued. But anyway, you get my point.
If the conversation was test and deca or 1,000 test, I'd go test deca.
Okay.
With the conversation being test EQ or test, I'd lean towards test. I don't think there's going to be a huge amount in it. I think it's going to be very, very similar. I think a lot would depend on how sensitive the individual was to the suppression of estrogen from the EQ. As we know, that seems to be a bit hit and miss. It can absolutely slam some people into the ground, and other people it doesn't seem to have anywhere near that effect.
Yeah.
But I don't think there'd be a huge amount in it, in that choice of compounds. But I would, personally, as it stands, lean slightly towards the gram of test. Yeah, you may have some more sides to deal with, but I think you're going to get an overall greater muscular progress. Now, if we were talking 600 test, 400 deca, I would go test and deca over test only, because I do feel that deca is a better compound for that overall mass building.
You're not a big fan of EQ, is what I'm hearing.
Well, I've grown to be more
open-minded.
I personally don't like it as a compound, but I have seen it be productive in people. I don't see it as productive as deca. And I don't, like I say, in this scenario, I think I'd probably lean slightly towards the test, but I don't think I think real world, if you could take two genetically equal people, same diet, same training, everything, I don't think you're going to see a massive difference in the end results between the two. I think the differences are more going to be in the journey rather than the end result. In that, depending on the individual, they may find the journey more difficult just on test.
Yeah.
And they might find the test and EQ a little bit easier to work with.
I could see that.
I think the overall result is going to be very, very similar.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that, honestly. I think part of it, too, is going to come down to, one of the people that responded said, well, EQ is going to have an AI effect on the test. Now, I became open-minded to that idea in the last year, and I've rigorously monitored blood work from clients that are using this combination of compounds. Understand, as a coach, I'm not performing scientific experiments like a researcher is, but I have the opportunity to see a wide cross-section of people, not only my clients, but the other coaches that I talk to about specific topics like this. And across the board, and you and I know have agreed on this, it's hit or miss whether EQ is going to have an AI effect. So I wouldn't just count on it versus ADEX is always going to have an AI effect,
Yeah. No, I agree. I've seen it absolutely destroy estrogen levels.
Yeah.
And I've seen it have virtually no impact whatsoever. So it is very person specific.
What about I've seen it more like lower dose, like say we're doing 300 tests, 300 EQ. But when we get up to 700 tests, 700 EQ, I don't necessarily see it doing the same thing.
I think there's also a ceiling as well, yes. I've seen some very dramatic effects around the 300-400 milligram mark.
Yeah.
I don't think that effect is particularly amplified as the dose goes up. And we see this with other stuff as well. 2 gram a test isn't going to give you double the results of 1 gram a test. Just not happening. So there does seem to be a ceiling with the anti-EQ effect, the anti-estrogen effect from EQ when it does impact someone that way. But it is definitely not across the board. It's not like Primo.
where you'll pretty much see 99% of people take Primo, they're gonna get an anti-estrogen impact from it.
Yeah.
And I say 99% because there will always be that one fucker that doesn't behave like everybody else.
And that guy will comment on our shows every time a topic comes up about anything. He always does. We know that guy very well. Yeah, okay. I hope that gives this guy some insight. You had one about phlebotomy, didn't you?
Yeah, so a guy actually messaged me today. Actually, he preceded with, "This is probably a really dumb shit question," sort of thing. But basically, the query was that if he did a bloodlet, would he need to compensate with his dosing for the fact that he'd removed a pint of blood that obviously had anabolics in it?
Yeah.
And I explained that it wasn't necessary. The real world impact wouldn't really be noticeable at all, and just to carry on as normal. But I can understand why somebody would think that. I mean, you're removing, in most cases, about 10% of somebody's blood volume. So as a result, you would technically sort of argue, well, you'll be removing 10% of the gear. But that's not strictly true, because you're not going to have 10% of your gear free floating in that volume of blood, because a lot of it's going to be bound to receptors and other enzymes. So it's not quite literally 10% of the gear that you're removing. It's a much smaller fraction. And in the real world impact of that is going to be fuck all.
Hey, let's try adjusting your mic again. I'm sorry. It doesn't sound its best. Maybe try turning it again. Let's see what happens when you turn it all the way around.
So you want me to go
Oh,
opposite?
that's better.
Oh, you're just a pain in the ass.
Yeah,
You really are.
can you turn it all the way around? I wonder if that would be better. Let's see. How
What,
that
you see,
sounds.
you want it like that?
Let's hear how that sounds for a minute. And now you can move it back just a little bit, because we can hear you breathing now.
All right, bollocks.
Yeah, that's much better.
So you prefer that? Will you make your mind? Jesus Christ!
Mine
it's like being
is
with
made
a
up.
Woman.
You asked me before if I was happy, and I said I was mildly happy. Now I am freaking ecstatic, Dave. Okay?
God,
I'm
it's just
ecstatic.
like.
Dave, can you tell me something?
No.
Do you like this shirt?
No.
Guys, for the audio listeners, I'm holding up a plaid flannel shirt. It's a blue tone.
That's green.
Yeah, you're right. It's a green tone.
Yeah.
It's a cool.
Colorblind git.
There's a blue quality to it. You can't see it in my coloring right now, but there is a blue and green tone to it. Dave, can you tell us about the shirt you're wearing today?
I'm not wearing a shirt. This is the difference, you see, sir.
What is this?
So this is basically a poncho. It's effectively a picnic blanket with a head hole in it.
Okay.
And I love it. So it's basically like, it's a bit like me moo, but it's not full length.
Are you wearing? Okay, so you are wearing pants under it.
Yeah, no, I'm dressed underneath it.
Okay.
It is quite literally a blanket with a head hole,
I like
then
that.
it's got press studs down both sides, so you can sort of clip it together, or you
Okay.
can undo them, and it is just become a blanket.
Huh. Do you remember the Snuggie?
No.
It was literally a blanket with a hole through the top that you put your head through.
Yeah, this is basically what this is.
Okay. Interesting.
I absolutely love it. I've not had it off my back for ages.
I've got a question here. So somebody commented on one of our old episodes. I want to make sure that we got it in. We usually take all of our questions off the latest episode, guys. He says, I like the idea of multiple compounds in moderation. Oh, it's actually just a comment, but I thought we could make this into a topic. He says, I'm already an advanced elite lifter for being 170 pounds natural. I plan on grabbing Test Prop, Tren Ace, Masteron Prop, and running them 75 each as a blend, and injecting 1.4 milliliters a week, starting with T-ball for 3 weeks, while running Ostarine for the entire cycle, running both as low doses as well. I think I can put on a really dry 20 pounds if I dial in PCT while keeping the Ostarine up until the last week of PCT. No need to blast grams of gear, in my opinion.
Right. So from what he said, this sounds like it's his first cycle.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to, and I thought we should discuss.
So, though the total dosage is gonna be 350 total from the injectables, and then obviously the orals on top. For me, I wouldn't be running that blend of compound. Well, I wouldn't run a blend anyway, full stop, because you've got no control over the dosing. You're stuck with whatever it is, and if you don't get on with the trend, though I appreciate it, is a low dose, then what you're going to do? You can't drop it out because it's the blend. Also, from what I've seen with testing, blends are the worst compounds for not having what they should have in them, in one way or another. So, never been keen on blends. I know it's a cheap alternative than buying them separately, but you do lose that control, and generally you do lose quality of drug. Secondly, I know it's been said over and over again, but as a first cycle, I would stick to a single compound because you do not know what's going on, and the most obvious one is going to be test. Secondly, an oral kickstart, in my opinion, is not the way to go because you're creating this massive androgen load at the beginning of the cycle. Granted, in this particular instance, the overall doses are low. I would use the oral at the back end of the cycle. The other thing is, you don't run Osterine through a PCT. Osterine is suppressive. It's not as suppressive, but it is still suppressive. You are coming from a suppressed state. You are going to hinder your PCT by running Osterine. So your PCT wants to be with nothing at all other than your PCT.
Agreed.
If you put Osterine in there, you are going to restrict your recovery. And if you're doing that because in some way you think it's going to help maintain your gains, then you shouldn't need something to help maintain your gains because your training should do that. And from what you've said, you are an experienced lifter. You are already at a high level of development. So I suspect that your training and diet are already pretty much on point. So you don't need it. So, yeah, that's pretty much my take. I don't like blends for the various reasons I've already just said. I think a first cycle should always be a single compound. I don't have the issue with adding the oral, but it would be at the back half and drop the Osterine. It's not going to add anything really to the cycle when you've got oral anabolics in there, and it definitely doesn't want to be run through your PCT.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on all of that. There's also going to be some additional logistics to using short-acting compounds for your first cycle. I assume that he's not an experienced injector with oil-based depot steroids. I generally don't suggest that people start with a test probe that's going to require skill in injecting into multiple sites through the week. It's going to require I don't know if he understands. He didn't say how he was going to split it up. He just said 1.4 mil per week.
He could get away with 2, but most will run 3 shots a week for that. So
I would run 4. I'd just go every other day. Keep it simple, especially with Tren Ace is so fast. To dig a little deeper into one of the points you made too, Dave, about the one compound, start with one compound. You really want to see how you respond to just test alone. See how that goes for you. See, are you somebody that needs an AI? You're going to find out when you go on just test alone. Are you going to need more AI or less AI or no AI? You're going to make just as good a progress. I absolutely guarantee you that. He said he wants to be able to put on a clean, lean, dry. He said the word dry was the word he used, 20 pounds. You could put 20 pounds on a muscle with test, just long-acting test sip, test E, just as well as you could with these other compounds. The dryness, all of that stuff, it's going to, in large part, come down to the diet. Now, it's not going to keep you dry like Masteron is going to keep you dry, but, you're trying to grow anyway, So I would suggest just a simple test cycle, 300, 400 milligrams, even 500 milligrams for your first run. When you get up to that 5, I do think that you're going to be more sensitive to holding more water. You probably are going to be more likely to need an AI. If he was as low, but you also are going to make better progress, I believe, than you are at a low dose like 253,
Yeah, I mean, the other thing as well is, and I've never quite understood this for a lot of people, particularly someone who's in a strength sport, is if you're a little bit messy in the process, so you get a little bit soft in the process, what does it matter as long as you get the result you require at the end of it? Because then the softness is going to go anyway.
Yeah.
So, and I see a lot of people actually compromising their cycles or running unnecessary drugs in their cycles because they're obsessed with this looking a certain way throughout the progress.
All the time. And
the probably the biggest anti to this was probably, well, the two would probably be Lee Peast and Dorian. Both looked messy in their off seasons.
They were extreme.
And both delivered very well conditioned physiques with plenty of mass when they stepped on stage.
Yeah.
Now they're two extreme examples, but they are a very good example of why, just because you get a little bit messy in the progress doesn't mean the result's going to be messy. Because once you come off, you drop that cycle, the water's going to go, you're going to lean and harden up, and there you've got the end results. But so many people worry about how they look in the process that they actually damage the result because of it.
Oh, Dave, could you imagine missing out on being an elite strength athlete like he is? Could you imagine missing out on getting that, say, if he's 170 pounds, let's say he puts on 7 pounds of just interstitial fluid, like let's say it's in the muscle fluid, the strength that he's going to get from that.
From that alone, yeah, it's going to be huge.
Imagine missing out on that in this cycle. That would be a shame. That would be a shame. How about this one, Dave?
There's one in the feed I want to deal with as well.
Okay. If Dave is doing blood work, what's the most common dose of test that people are saying that they're on now? What's let's just say the most common TRT or TRT plus dosing, and how many people are adding a DHT in with that nowadays?
It's fairly evenly spread. So we get, of all the TRT people we do, and I don't mean as in they're just on TRT. I mean people that are on TRT at the point that we test them.
Right.
Probably a third are running what I would call legit TRT. They're keeping the test levels in range or pretty close to being in range. So they might be just at the top end of it, but they're generally keeping it in a good place. About a third are just test, but they're running high. And by high, usually it's 150 milligrams upwards to 2. You get the odd extreme ones where they're 250, 300, but most it's going to be somewhere between 150 and 200 milligrams a week. Or you get the odd 1 millers that are running the 250 a week. And then about another third will be 200 to 300 milligrams of test with Primo or mass, but more commonly Primo.
Okay, yeah.
So they're the sort of three-way split we see in. Like I say, a third what I would call legit. And I don't have people. I think people seem to think that I have this big thing against TRT plus. I don't. I have a big thing against calling it TRT because I think it gives the wrong message. So when someone's looking in on this, they'll see sports TRT or TRT plus, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's TRT." It's not. Yeah. It is above that, and it needs a certain level of respect because of that. And so that's where my issue is. It's not around, if you want to run 400 milligram of test year round per week, that's down to you at the end of the day.
Would you say crack on, Dave?
Well, all I would say is, obviously, with these elevated doses comes an elevated level of responsibility and an elevated level of management that's required.
Yeah.
And when people are doing 200, 300 mega tests a week and 150 mega primo a week, but genuinely thinking that's TRT, that's when you start to see problems developing 12, 18 months down the line because they don't know what they're doing because they've fed into this, well, that's what TRT is. So that's where my issue is. It's not about the doses run. It's about how those doses are publicized or labeled that I have an issue with. Which leads on to Tom's question, because Tom actually says, how does he feel about living on a higher TRT test and 2 IU a GH? So I'm going to deal with that at the same time if you're all right with that, Scott.
Yeah, have at it, man. Oh, I see
So-
that one.
When you take anabolics of any nature, you create stress. You also have impacts on certain areas of the body: cardiovascular, lipids, blood thickness, and to an extent, potentially prostate. So all these areas are affected by your use of anabolics. When you use test in what is a natural range, you are allowing your body to operate in a way that it's designed to operate. It knows those doses, it knows those levels, it will cope with them. It's unlikely to cause huge adulteration in lipids, though it still might cause some. It shouldn't cause astronomically high estrogen levels, shouldn't have a particularly negative impact on the prostate, etc., because you're within a range that your body's designed to deal with. When you go above that, you then start to trigger these negative impacts in these areas. So blood thickening, lowering of HDL, and the potential, though to a lesser degree, stimulation of the prostate. So straight away you're creating a need for more management, because you're now going to have to monitor your blood. You're going to have to make sure you're being preventive or supportive of your lipids, and you're going to have to start managing estrogen. So that may then require extra drugs in order to deal with that. Now, one of the aspects around anabolic use that isn't really talked about in the same way is stress. When you take anabolics, you create a level of inflammation and stress within the body. The more you expose yourself to that, the more resources the body has to then divert to dealing with that. If you run a bridge period, a TRT period, at a higher dose,
Yeah.
then you're going into your next cycle in a more stressed state.
Sure.
Top guys dedicate their lives to what they do, and as a result are much more prone to managing this stress in a better way. So top pros, they may run higher TRTs. One, they're generally carrying more muscle mass than you do, so there is some argument that they may require it. And two, their stress management around their training and everything is much more proficient, because that's all they do. That's their job.
Agreed.
As an amateur or a hobbyist or a whatever you want to put yourself into, you have other life stresses. You don't have as much resources and time to dedicate to stress management when it comes to physical stress management, as in chemical-induced management. And as a result, these high TRTs can definitely have an impact on the progression of your subsequent cycle. But I have seen numerous people develop long-term issues, particularly around cardiovascular, because of this long-term adulteration of lipids due to running high TRTs. For most of us, our bridge period between cycles is going to be somewhere maxing out around 12 weeks. There's a few that will go longer, but most people within 12 weeks are getting back on.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be having any significant muscle mass loss within that period. Yes, you'll get a bit flatter, but if you do, then I would be questioning other aspects of what you're doing rather than your drug protocols. And I think there's three things that drive this high TRT. One, it's a genuine fear of losing size.
Absolutely.
And in some cases that may be justified because they're compensating with drugs. It's too trend driven because influential people do it, so they feel they should do it. And three, it's this drug dependency psychological link that you start to develop with long-term exposure to anabolics, that you need them. You're not going to be you without them. You're going to be lesser of a person. That's the tip of a dangerous developing relationship. So for a lot, it's just an excuse to use more drugs because they fear that if they don't, they're going to be less of who they are. But it also doesn't force you to face that if you are losing size, there's something wrong. Something's not working right for you, and you need to assess that. You know, if you want to run high doses of tests in your bridges because you're scared of losing muscle mass, or your training's a bit shit, or your diet's a bit shit, that's your choice. But what I would love to see is honesty around that. And most don't. They'll justify it as, I need this because of the... Okay, now I was 365 pounds and I still fucking PCT'd.
Yeah, that's crazy. Nobody PCTs anymore, Dave.
They don't, but they don't. It's a personal choice. There's nothing wrong with PCT and there's nothing wrong with TRT.
Yeah.
Just do what's right for you.
I like that. It's a good message overall, Dave. All right. What else do we have here? Question. How can I go? Okay, yeah. This one was also posted on one of our other episodes, and I said, hey, we'll talk about this on the next show. Really foundational stuff. How can I go on cycle and not lose natural test or lose as much? Which reminds me, the guy who was talking about Ostarine, you mentioned like you don't run Ostarine through your PCT, you know. Ostarine is suppressive. In case he didn't clue in on that part of the conversation, Ostarine isn't the miracle compound that everybody thought it was going to be. It's not completely selective. It will shut you down. So it might not be as suppressive as, say, a 19-nor, which you're also using, but you know, there is that aspect. So don't forget that.
Of the SARM family, it's probably the least suppressive of the SARM family. I would say Ostarine, Andrine, S4, then you start getting to Rad 140, YK, which are very suppressive.
Which are also stronger compounds, like more effective as well, you know?
Well, is it YK's built on a steroid backbone anyway, so he's effectively an anabolic structure. But the thing is, you're not... If you were natural and you took Ostarine, you might see mild suppression, but not full suppression. But you're not. You're coming from a fully suppressed state.
Yeah.
So when you put that in when you're trying to recover, it's going to have a much bigger impact on hampering your recovery.
Absolutely.
Than it would as a standalone product.
All right. So this guy, he says, how can I go on cycle and not lose natural test or as much? There's two things to this: dose and duration. Those are, I think, and choice of compounds too. If he's never used anything and he just uses, say, a simple test cycle and he limits dose and duration, I think those two things are definitely going to play into his favor.
So just so people understand, when you go on cycle, the immediate point you inject or take anabolics doesn't mean that immediately your natural production stops. With oral-only cycles, particularly low dose, I've seen people actually maintain a low level of natural production throughout the cycle, but it's not going to be normal. With injectables, the suppression tends to be much stronger. Test-only is probably going to suppress you within 3-4 weeks. Stuff like Tren and Deca, literally within a matter of a week or two.
Yeah.
And if you've more experience use, i.e. you're a regular user, and if you're PCT, and your suppression is probably going to be quicker because your body's going to know straight away, bang, we're up, down, we go. But there is no real way you can maintain natural production to a full extent and take anabolics, but the degree of suppression will vary depending on dose and compound.
Yeah.
You can help maintain lady cell integrity by running things like HCG throughout your cycle, which should make recovery much easier, but you're not going to stop the production. There are localized inhibins that are going to shut testosterone production down at a testicular level, irrespective of whether you maintain hormone signaling or not.
Yep, I would agree with that. Dose, duration. Because the other side of it is, okay, so you mentioned like a low dose of an oral only cycle. Are you going to make the same progress you're going to make on a full cycle? Probably not.
No, of course you don't.
So there's a balance in there. Do we have to go to an extremely suppressive compound to be able to make gains? No, we don't necessarily need to use a 19-nor. I would suggest a low dose of test, and if he was really concerned, he could run HCG throughout, like 250 every third day, something like that, and keep that tight, like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, absolute max. I do work with people that do come off and do PCT and recover, and that's generally what I try to keep it to is 8 to 10 weeks, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, dose duration play a massive factor in recovery ability, but it is very much down to a person. I mean, I have worked with 2 people that don't suppress until they go over 500 milligrams of test.
No kidding.
Yeah, caused loads of confusion when I first came across it because it's like, what the fuck is going on here?
Just like I've worked with people who are instantly suppressed,
Yeah.
people who struggle to recover and, they have a hard time after.
Yeah, no, these did 2. And they were on TRT, still producing natural levels, still having full FSH and LH signaling.
Yeah.
And we played around, so we'd do a test with them in a dose, and then we'd remove the dose, retest, see where they were, and it wasn't until they started getting into the 500 mg range that they actually suppressed their signaling.
Huh. That's crazy. All right, let's see if we can rapid fire through the rest of this. I know we had a couple in the live stream, so I'll knock those out. There was one about, here it is. While running 50 milligrams a day of Anavar, taking Tutka at 500 milligrams daily, should I dose it 500 milligrams one time or 250 twice a day, AM and PM, if just one daily? I don't understand the last part.
I don't think there's going to be any real significance either way. The half-life of TDC is high enough that you would get away with single dosing daily. So I wouldn't be super concerned about that.
I'd agree with you on that one. All right, how about this one? Okay, we covered that one. Okay, I'm 54 for 4 years. Every year I add 1 PED to my TRT for 8 weeks. TRT plus Winstrol. Following year Deca, then Anavar. I never do PCT. Do I need to PCT if I'm on TRT?
Nope. PCT, post-cycle therapy, is for the recovery of natural hormones. If you are on TRT, depending on what your cycle dosing was, I would potentially stop the TRT for a couple of weeks just to allow levels to get back into range. But other than that, you would just continue back on your TRT.
Yeah, I'm working with somebody now from your neck of the woods who had a coach who had him prepare an entire PCT after his cycle, but he's a TRT patient.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. I've seen people run PCTs when they're on TRT, and it's just like, what? And the reasoning was, I'm refreshing my receptors. Your receptors are dead, mate. They die every day.
Do you notice any strength or training benefits to using shorter versus longer esters?
Initially, very, very slightly, and that's simply because peak plasma levels occur much quicker.
And you feel it, there's less of a slow build. So take NPP, for instance. Like, I'll definitely notice, 2 weeks into NPP, you're like, oh, shit, this is some incredible bumps and gains,
Is it going to be greater in total? No.
Yeah, I would agree.
But would it peak quicker? Potentially, yes.
Would you say, Dave, to kind of piggyback off this one, that long esters are ultimately going to be better for building muscle in an off season?
I would, because generally speaking, the total load's going to be greater.
Yeah.
By the time you get to your peak, which is 5-6 weeks, is where you're going to start to see your peaks. In order to achieve that with fast acting, it would be quite a high dose.
Yeah.
Because obviously you've got this accumulative effect with long esters, which you don't have with fast esters. So you're pretty much using what you're putting in to a degree. There is a little bit overlap because of the half-life is 3 days in most cases, and obviously you tend to be injecting every other day or every third day to a degree, but that's to the half-life. But with long esters, you're going to get this much bigger overlap, therefore a much greater total androgen. So I would say that in the most part, long esters are going to create greater peaks, greater total anabolic load overall, and therefore are going to result in greater gains, all other things being equal.
Yeah. What's up, gang? By the way, thanks for everybody watching live. We've got about 20 people on the stream right now. How about this one? Okay, another one here from Patreon. That last one was too from Casey. This one's from Andrew, and he says, when finishing a cruise, would you jump back on the dose you finished your last mass phase on?
Well, I get right. So if I understand this right, what he's saying is, say he did, for argument's sake, a cycle of a total of 1.5 grams.
Right.
Then he goes into his cruise, TRT, whatever it is. So what he's saying is his next cycle would start at 1.5 grams.
That's, I think, what he's saying.
So I'm assuming then from that, and this is a big assumption, that his cycle is semi-ascending, which is why he's ended at this total dose, and he thinks, so is that the start point for my next push?
Yeah.
Which will be ascending from there. And I would say no. You can run the same total load. You could even run a lower load, but different compounds. 1,500 of test and mast is not going to yield. There's going to be probably similar results from a lower dose, but with stronger drugs. So if you put test and tren in there, you're probably going to get similar progress, but with a less total dosing. But obviously, it's going to be more impacting on you from a size point of view as well. So you've got to factor that level in.
But let's just call it simple. Let's say he did 750 test for that first cycle, and he ran it all the way through, whatever it was. Then he did his cruise phase, went down to TRT or whatever he wants to do. He's going back on now. Should he start back up at 750, or does he now need to go to a gram?
No, he can run the same again, and he could probably run the same again for 2 or 3 cycles. It will vary on each person depending on the level of development you're getting out of each cycle. But no, I mean, you can repeat the same cycle a few times and the same doses before ultimately, the dose is going to have to go up as your level of muscle mass increases. But you may find that you can get away with the same dose cycle 2 or 3 times before you get to a point where you need to increase it.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that we used to really be taught 20 years ago about getting into anabolics, Dave, and I know you know this too, is get the most out of the dose you're using now. That we had such an idea in our head about the big picture, about, this bodybuilding's a long game. I remember starting my first cycle and making so much progress and then thinking to myself, holy shit, if I do this 3 more times, I'll be Arnold Schwarzenegger. Guess what? It didn't happen. You know what I mean? But I think it's important to remember that it's about leaving room, and I do this too with dieting. I want to try to diet somebody down, leaving in as much food as possible so that what I call keeping as many good cards in our hand as possible, because it's a long game and you don't want to be stuck without an ace later on. If you pull out all the stops in your first, second, third cycle, well, where are you going to go from there when really you could have made a lot better progress keeping it mild and focusing more on other aspects, your diet, your training, and optimizing that cycle, So that'd be one of the things I'd definitely, I guess, still suggest to people.
Yeah, I know. I agree completely.
Let's see if we had anything else in the stream here. Once again, thank you guys for joining us. And, for anybody that didn't check out the beginning of the show, as a reminder, if you're new to our content, we have several shows that come out each week. So we'd love to have you along for all of them. Like, share, subscribe, comment, ring the bell, all those things. Dave, I do have one more question for you. 2025 is... Well, for the people watching this, it's here. We're recording this right on the cusp of 2025 for us. What's one thing you want to achieve in 2025?
You know what? I haven't thought about it as anything. I've got some ongoing goals.
Yeah.
I still want to develop eval. We want to do a more. One of the things with eval is it's to an extent got this reputation of being for anabolic users. And obviously about 50% of our customer base is. So we're going to subdivisionalize and bring out eval fit, which is specifically going to go after the CrossFit and Hydrox markets.
Which they need labs too.
Yeah, they do. And it's just, so it's going to be a more health-driven marketing. I've got 2 other companies I'm working on. One is a phlebotomy training company, which will be up and running very, very shortly. The other one I'm saying bugger all about. You'll have to wait.
Are you tapping your mic or something?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. But yeah, I don't really have anything specific to the year. I had originally planned to try and be at a point where I was going to semi-retire.
Okay.
I haven't made that point, and the bottom line is I just don't have enough resources to be able to do it. I still owe money, and I need to clear some overhead before I can do that. I'm not a million miles away, and if I did a few things, I could definitely get there, but I'm happy to take a bit longer about it. But I actually, as time's gone on, I've got less. I find the thought of doing nothing less attractive.
Yeah. You just had a few days off, and you're telling me that you still had partially off. You had eval.
Yeah, and I've been reading a lot about I might say this wrong, logotherapy or logotherapy. Which is basically a Middle Eastern approach to mental health. And I found that quite interesting. And one of the big aspects of it is to stay active.
Okay.
So I think the sitting on my arse on the boat, doing nothing sort of dream is actually not as much for me as I thought it might be. And having spent time down on the boat, I mean, I do enjoy it. I do love it down there, but I do see that I need to be doing something.
So this is interesting. It says, if I'm pronouncing it right, logotherapy, or how you mentioned it, logotherapy. I think it starts with O, logo. Could be wrong. Somebody may tell us. Is a therapeutic approach that helps people find personal meaning in life. It's a form of psychotherapy that is focused on the future and our ability to endure hardship and suffering through search for purpose. Man, I'll tell you, Dave, purpose is so important, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, I do have a lot of purpose now. I'm not short of purpose, but I've just found it interesting because what I've been looking at is the difference between Western mental health management and Asian and Eastern mental health management.
Yeah.
And the difference very much in a nutshell is that Western therapy looks at causes for your problems.
Yeah.
To me, the result of that is it justifies your problems and gives you an excuse for having those problems. And what I've found with a lot of people that undergo Western therapy is that, well, I'm broken because of this XYZ, so that justifies me being broken, and therefore I don't need to action where I am.
I think that can be a pitfall of it.
Very much so. I'm not saying it's, but there's a lot of justification in it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of practice tends to focus on, well, yeah, but you're this way because of XYZ, so it's okay. And it's like, yeah, it is and it isn't. There's reasons for you being how you are.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't improve an action on moving forward from that point.
It's the first step. Like, understanding why you are the way you are can be helpful in getting to where you want to be. But yeah, it's not the end.
But a lot of people then sit in that. We have very much a growing victim mentality with people where, yeah, but I'm broken because of X, Y, Z, and so you need to accommodate that. No, not at all. I don't need to accommodate that. I understand that that could be causation for where you are, but it doesn't mean you can't move forward from there. Whereas logotherapy is much more about you endure hardship, you endure pain, and I'm talking about emotional pain rather than physical pain, because that then strengthens you to be more productive as a person and move forward. And it's about being productive, and it's less about personal achievement and more about how you're productive to society, how you add to people's greater life.
Dude.
So I've been looking at stuff like that a bit.
The 12-step program that I'm involved with, it's important to understand where we were, but more importantly, and it specifically says this in the text, that our focus isn't what we've done, but where we're going. And in a big aspect of that is getting outside of yourself and helping other people, and I think there's such a therapeutic benefit in that, and that in itself gives purpose. I'll be honest with you, Dave, I've talked about this before. A big part of why I do what I do with the podcast is it does give me an ability to help others in some way. And that helps to fulfill my life mission, basically. My coaching is to help me fill my life mission of helping others. That helps me to be the best person I can.
I think this, if we're going to do a Dave's advice thing this week, it sort of pushes into that, does this conversation, because when you seek happiness through materialistic things, you won't gain happiness, you will gain enjoyment.
And you'll gain a lot of things.
There is a distinct difference.
Yeah.
If you look towards financial gain or asset gain, so nice cars, nice houses, these can all give you enjoyment. They can all be very enjoyable. Nice holidays, very enjoyable. I love cars. I really do enjoy the cars I have. They give me a great deal of enjoyment, but they don't give me happiness.
Yeah.
My happiness comes from within me, in the person I am, how I feel about that, and how I feel I contribute to the world around me. That's where your happiness comes from. It comes from accepting you, which is never going to be perfect. None of us are. There's always going to be things you could be better at and do at, but then a work towards an end goal, a purpose, a productivity, that side of things, which is where the logotherapy stuff comes in.
Yeah, I like that.
Having a drive to be purposeful is going to give you happiness. Accruement of materialistic things is going to give you enjoyment. The two are different. Enjoyment is fleeting. It's never lasting.
Yeah.
Happiness is lasting. And that's where I think a lot of people... I've done it with materialistic things. The 400-pound thing, when I got there, it was going to be this big moment, and it wasn't. It was
when you reached 400 pounds on the scale.
Yeah, it was just the biggest anticlimax ever. Yeah. It was me being a sad twat, having damaged my health in a mill on a scale, industrial scale, looking at it and going, "Wait, I made 400 pounds. Big deal. Who gives a shit? Nobody did."
Yeah.
But the journey, the purpose, gave me actually a great deal of enjoyment.
Yeah.
Great deal of happiness. The purpose did.
Yeah.
But the actual achievement was very empty. And that's that difference between a materialistic goal and having a purpose and driving towards something you want to achieve and do.
Yeah.
And I think most people, if they're very, very honest, when they get, and they're not particularly shallow, when they make materialistic achievements, which is great, being a millionaire is amazing, having a nice house is amazing, not knocking any of it at all. But it's enjoyable rather than being happy. The happiness comes from a different place. Happiness comes from a self-worth, from a productivity, not from a financial or materialistic gain of any nature.
Yeah, it can be tough because I think that sometimes we start tying our sense of self-worth to the amount of material things we have. Like, now that I have this car, that's a status symbol of how important I am and how well I've done. So I need the car for that purpose to be able to say I achieved that,
And you don't at all. Some of the happiest and most well-rounded people I've ever met have fuck all.
Yeah. It's hard to connect to when it's somebody who's destitute, but when you see somebody who's like, hey, they got their crap together, they've got a life that I respect, it's yeah. I'm with you 100% on that, man. And it's a good reminder to, I guess, all of us, myself included.
Yeah. Yep. So that sort of covers both bases at once, does that?
All right, guys. Well, listen, we appreciate you tuning in. If you have questions for the next show, then definitely comment below. And you can go to evalbloodanalysis.com. You can get your lab work done by Dave if you live in the UK. And if you're in the UK, then you should be shopping with Strom Sports Nutrition. That's stromsports.com. They've got great health supplements, health stacks, especially for you guys on cycle, some performance stuff too. And we are brought to you by truenutrition.com. Every protein powder under the sun. All the carb powders you could possibly need, EAAs and more. Use our code THINK over there and supplementsource.ca. The Canadian Mail was forced back to work without making any of their the things that they wanted. They had asked for some changes. The government said no. No changes. We're forcing you back to work. So that means that your order will be shipped from supplementsource.ca with no delay.
Pretty similar happened over here with the British Post Office.
Did it? No, just get back to work.
Yeah, they went on strike, and I don't think they got anywhere near what they'd hoped to get out of it.
Well, guys, for another episode here of the podcast with Dave Crosland, we'll see you soon. Thanks, Dave.
Layers.